You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm James Reinl, and we're taking a look at Israel, Iran, and the Palestinian question. Last month, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was facing an early election to shore up his position. But in a graceful political maneuver, a deal with the opposition Kadima party gave him a block of more than 3/4 of the parliament. This supermajority gives Netanyahu more latitude in dealing with Israel's two key issues, Iran and the Palestinians. Israel sees Tehran's nuclear program as an existential threat and threatens to strike Iranian facilities. Analysts are divided over whether an attack will work and whether America will send in the cavalry as backup. This week, Israel has returned the remains of 91 Palestinians who died carrying out attacks against the country. The confidence-building measure comes as Israeli officials mull whether to withdraw from the West Bank like they did from Gaza back in 2005. Peace talks between the two sides hit a wall at the end of 2008 because of Israel's continued settlement building on Palestinian soil. So, what does Israel's new coalition government mean for the hotbed region? Are Israel's hawks in a stronger position to launch the much-discussed attack on Iran? And where would a West Bank pullout leave the Palestinian Authority? To answer these questions, we're hosting a debate in our London studio. I'm joined by David Patrikarakos, the journalist and author of the forthcoming book Nuclear Iran, Birth of an Atomic State; Jaafar Elahmar, a journalist and commentator on Middle Eastern affairs; Matthew Harris, a blogger on Israeli issues; and over the line from Moscow by Dmitriy Mariasis from the Russian Academy of Sciences. Okay, gentlemen, to get the ball rolling, I'd like to get a single-sentence answer from each of you to the following question. First of all, to you, David Patrikarakos. Is Israel's new coalition government good or bad for peace in the Middle East?
Well, it can't be any worse than what's gone before.
Okay, and Jaafar Elahmar?
The same. There's no change.
Okay, Matthew Harris?
I think it's a positive step because such a broad swathe of Israeli political opinion is now inside the government that perhaps the government will be able to take bold moves should the opportunity present itself.
And Dmitry, over the line from Moscow.
I think that we have yet to think about it, but I think that it's paradoxically better for peace in the Middle East.
Paradoxically better for peace in the Middle East. Can you explain that one a bit more?
You see, we know that Netanyahu is hawkish, and Faz himself, the chairman of Kadima, new elected chairman of the Kadima party, is hawkish, as we used to think about him. But actually, the Kadima itself is now driving to the central left wing of the political spectrum. That's why I expect that they appreciate very much the voices of leftist people and who want peace. And if Kadima wants to preserve its electorate, it would have to be more peaceful-like. And there's one thing. And the second thing, the unity government, it means that they have to bring to the consensus. And I think that there are lots of people in Israel who don't want the war in the Middle East anymore.
Okay, maybe I'll turn that one back to the studio. And Matthew Harris, this new coalition government, the size of it is 94 seats in the parliament, which has 120 seats overall. I mean, that is a startling majority. And many of the analysts that I'm reading about say that it improves the situation for the people more towards the centre, which is the point that you were making, because now Netanyahu doesn't have to rely on, for example, the nationalists and more extreme elements of Israel's parliament.
I think that's true, and I'm not a starry-eyed optimist when it comes to what's going to happen in Israeli-Palestinian peace process over the coming months, but I do think that it does strengthen the centre ground of Israeli politics. It puts the centre ground right into the heart of government, and I think that there are positive signs of possibilities of things happening in terms of, as you said, confidence-building measures, and I wonder whether it's going to prove possible to bring the two sides back to the table again at some point over the next 12 months. I think it might be.
Now, Jaafar, you said no.
Because I think the coalition is made just for internal reasons. Kadima was very weak and is supposed to lose more seats. And Netanyahu also, he was opportunist at this moment. He got the support from Kadima when he knew that he is weak. And thus, I think, it has nothing to do with the possibilities of peace process or negotiation with Palestinians. I think it is only opportunistic moment by Netanyahu and Kadima.
David Patrikarakos, do you agree that the new government is just an internal opportunistic measure and it's not going to have enormous consequences on the bigger issues?
Well, whether it will have enormous consequences or not, we can't really say, and unfortunately trying to predict anything in the Israeli-Palestinian peace process is a fool's errand. But when I said it couldn't be any worse, I wasn't merely being glib. I think this can only be positive. It may well be that the cover of Kadima in the government will give Netanyahu cover to make concessions that he otherwise would not have been able to do. So from that stance, I can think it's only positive, and it certainly can't be any worse than before.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm James Reinl, and we're taking a look at Israel, Iran, and the Palestinian question. I'm joined by David Patrikarakos, the journalist and author of the forthcoming book, Nuclear Iran, Birth of an Atomic State; Jaafar Elahmar, a journalist and commentator on Middle Eastern affairs; Matthew Harris, a blogger on Israeli issues; and over the line from Moscow by Dmitriy Mariasis from the Russian Academy of Sciences. Now, obviously, the issue of the Palestinians has come up. I think I'd like to turn to that later. But first of all, on the Iranian issue. David, this is obviously an issue that's going to be central to the book that you've got coming out. Maybe you can just give us an idea of how the Iranian nuclear program, how is that perceived by the Israelis?
Well, publicly, it's stated to be an existential threat to the state of Israel. Nuclear Iran is deemed totally unacceptable. Now, I've spoken to many Israeli diplomats, and most of them don't believe that it's actually an existential threat, i.e., if Iran were to get a bomb tomorrow, it wouldn't nuke Israel. The mullahs are fanatics, but they're fanatical about one thing above all else, their own survival. They wouldn't be that stupid. And I think Israeli diplomats know this, and they've told me this. And when Meir Dagin, the former head of Mossad, comes out and says attacking Iran would be a foolish idea, you do see that there is a strain of realism. Having said that, a nuclear-armed Iran would not be a good thing for Israel, and it would not be a good thing for the Middle East.
Matthew Harris, is that really how the average Israeli perceives the Iranian nuclear program?
There's two answers to that. I think that on a certain level it's an existential threat because you're talking about an irrational theocratic regime, be it Iran or for that matter Pakistan in future, having possession of nuclear weapons. So on that level, if you've got people like that declaring they want to wipe the state of Israel off the map, that's an existential threat. On another almost day-to-day level, rather like during the Cold War, we didn't in Britain think that we were going to be bombed by the Soviet Union with nuclear weapons at 3 o'clock tomorrow. Yes, it would be an existential threat in a broad sense, but in a tactical sense, life would go on in the state of Israel, and Israel's own nuclear deterrent would presumably go a certain way to deterring the Iranians. But if the Iranians are not to be viewed as irrational actors on this stage, then one can't necessarily assume that they will be rationally deterred by the possibility of a retaliatory Israeli nuclear attack if they attack Israel.
Jaafar, how realistic do you think the threat is, and how realistic do you think is this talk by Israelis of launching some kind of strike on Iranian nuclear facilities?
I think Israel enjoys playing the game of victim. It blackmails the world, especially the West, that it's under threat by Iranian irrational decisions. I think this is blackmailing the world to shift the attention from the real reason of the conflict in the Middle East. That's the occupation of the Palestinian territories. Israel always tried to escape facing this reality. It has to make concessions on the Palestinian issue, and thus trying to escape by creating unknown and unrealistic threat by Iranian, who up till now there is no concrete evidence that they have a military program for nuclear weapons. Even the Atomic Energy has said clearly that there's no evidence that they are doing any military program yet. There's no evidence. It is used by as I said, by Israel to blackmail the West and to play as a victim. And also it wins all the way. If the West puts more pressure on Iran, then that suits Israel, of course. And at the same time, Israel would shift the attention from the occupation to the Palestinian territories.
So, sorry, if I can just come in there. If you're saying that the Israel occupation of Palestinian territories is the root of the problem, does that mean that if we had a Palestinian state living alongside a state of Israel, that Iran would then cease to be hostile to the state of Israel?
Up till now, we are talking about the coalition. Is it good or bad to the peace in the Middle East? It doesn't seem that Netanyahu is interested in peace whatsoever. I mean, he is still.
But is Iran interested in
just
peace? Does Iran actually want to live at peace with Israel? Is
yes.
Iran seriously interested in resolving the Palestinian
problem?
problem?
Iran says always it accepts what the Palestinians accept. That is clear. They say we accept what the Palestinians accept. But what we see, what we witness, is not a peace. It's a peace process, and the peace process is not genuine. It is only buying time by Israel to create more facts on the ground every day by building settlements, and expelling Palestinians. Let me finish.
Okay.
Expelling Palestinians. Look what's happening in Jerusalem, for instance. They are expelling the Palestinians using the laws from the British era in Jerusalem, preventing the Palestinians from building houses there, squeezing them, and creating new facts. So these measures are not signs for any readiness for peace.
But if the peace process succeeded and we created a decent, viable Palestinian state, are you saying at that point the Iranians would want to recognize the state of Israel?
What I'm saying that this issue has been a long time before the creation even of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The occupation of Palestinian territories is very old, since 1948, and there are UN resolutions regarding this issue, and has not been solved. So Iran has nothing to do with the blocking the way to peace in the Middle East. At all.
I think that's right. I think there's a chance that we're conflating the two issues here. And maybe I'd like to turn to Dmitry in Moscow. Going back to the issue of Iran's nuclear program, and we will come to the Palestinian peace process afterwards. Going back to that, though, Dmitry, the guests here in the studio were fairly skeptical about what Israel says when it comes to Iran. What's the view from Moscow?
I really think that Israel has to say something. And, of course, there are special plans for the future warfare, but I think there is no way that Israel will really now attack Iran on any issue, because everybody is realistic. Everybody measures the effect, and everybody measures the victims of the warfare if started. That's why Israel really understands that if Iran, for example, would retaliate, it will cause a lot of casualties and a lot of victims in Israel itself. That's why Israel is not ready to get at one thing. On the other hand, everybody, and there are lots of experts and diplomats who say it, and I quite agree with people who were talking before me on the issue that there is no way that you live each day and think about that tomorrow Iran will going to bombard you. The only thing I think that really is important that Ahmadinejad and his people, it really makes people nervous when Ahmadinejad says that we have to stop, we have to finish with this Zionist state.
David Patrikarakos, that seems to be a point that echoes what you were saying, that what the Israelis saying, their threats of an attack on Iran, are to some extent bluster, and that really this idea of launching airstrikes all the way across to Iran is off the table.
I think that logistically speaking, it's going to be very difficult now. The point Dmitry made is a correct one, because the big imponderable here that we haven't mentioned yet is America. Now, in terms of Iranian retaliation, I've spoken to Israeli diplomats, and they said very simply, look, what can Iran do to us? Can launch a few missiles. Okay, we deal with missiles anyway from Hamas. They can cause trouble with Hezbollah and Hamas. We're fighting them anyway. Now, the big problem is, in terms of retaliation, is that the US would bear a lot of the brunt of retaliation. American service troops in the Gulf. Iran can cause a lot of trouble in Iraq and stir things up again. They can cause trouble in Afghanistan. I've spoken to many Americans about this inside the White House. An Israeli attack on a nuclear Iran is a disastrous outcome for the US. They wouldn't greenlight it. And in terms of Israel's capabilities, as a guy said to me, the Israelis tell us they can do it, our military says they can't.
But that doesn't mean that Israel wouldn't do it then, because they can start a war that America has to finish.
But they won't do that. They will only push America so far. They are allies. I mean, you've already seen the tensions between Obama and Netanyahu, and if Obama wins a second term, then I suspect he's going to be a lot tougher on the Israelis. That's why they're talking about this window of September before the elections. However, logistically speaking, I think it's too difficult now. The Iranian facilities are spread out across the country. Some of them are underground. They decentralized their program on the basis of the 1981 Osirak precedent, where Israel struck the Iraqi reactor. It was a single above-ground reactor. The Iranians learned for this. The facilities are dispersed around the countries. Israel would have to fly a far greater distance to strike them from the air. I just don't think it's logistically viable.
Matthew Harris, you write in support of Israel. Is that fair? Is Israel going to have to learn to live with an Iran that is, at the very least, quite advanced in terms of its uranium enrichment capability?
The Israeli position is that a nuclear-armed Iran is unacceptable. And how do you as a country, particularly a democratic country where you have to think about public opinion, how do you convince your people to live with something that you've said is unacceptable? So I think, frankly, this process is running on a number of different tracks. And one of those tracks is that Israel has survived partly because it's had a really quite buccaneering approach to the spirit of deterrence, and therefore it's in their interests for Iran to think that Israel might have the power to derail an Iranian nuclear program. It's in Israel's interest to be seen as having that sort of strength. I'm not a military analyst, so whether they do or don't have that sort of strength, I don't know. But I wouldn't put it past them to try if they decide that they have no alternative.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm James Reinl, and we're taking a look at Israel, Iran, and the Palestinian question. I'm joined by David Patrikarakos, the journalist and author of the upcoming book, Nuclear Iran, Birth of an Atomic State. Jaafar Elahmar, a journalist and commentator on Middle Eastern affairs. Matthew Harris, the blogger on Israeli issues. And over the line from Moscow by Dmitriy Mariasis from the Russian Academy of Sciences. Jaafar Elahmar, I'm going to turn to you there because I know that you were very keen on talking about the Palestinian issue. Maybe you can give us your comments on the latest developments. Israel has handed over to the Palestinian Authority the remains of 91 Palestinians who died carrying out attacks on Israel. They are the remains of suicide bombers and militants who died as far back as 1975. Israeli officials say that this transfer is a confidence-building measure, something that can hopefully kick-start some kind of dialogue, knowing, as we do, that talks between the two sides collapsed completely in 2010 over Israeli settlement construction. Do you see this as an olive branch?
No, not at all. I mean, what does the remains of 90 Palestinians buried in Israel for, 20 years will do to the Palestinians? The Palestinians, they have around 4,000 in jail now. This is the olive branch would be given to the Palestinians to release those who are in jail for 20 years and 30 years. Up till now, many Palestinians are put in jail without trial using the British law from the British era. Israel can put anyone in jail, any Palestinian, for 6 months without giving any excuse or putting him to trial. I think this government and the previous governments are not interested in peace whatsoever. They are buying time, building settlements. The whole issue is about the land and the refugees. The land, Israel is confiscated lands every day and creating more settlements. Palestinian refugees, this issue is not on the table. So what would be left to the Palestinians to negotiate upon? One more thing on Iran and Israel. It's ironic to say that Israel cannot accept a nuclear Iran while Israel itself is a nuclear country. Iran is not yet. There's a possibility of being a nuclear country. Let's say this. But Israel is a nuclear country. How come a nuclear country and also is not a member of NPT accuses Iran of destabilizing the area or whatever? I think the whole idea about threat or to Israel to attack Iran is used, I think, only to the West to put more sanctions on Iran. And that suits Israel, of course, because it keeps Iran weaker and weaker. But it will never solve the fear Israel is enjoying because it is not solving the problem of the Palestinians. If it solves the issue of the Palestinians and the occupation, then Israel will feel at peace. Otherwise, it would never feel secure. Neither from the neighboring countries nor from the Palestinians.
Can I just throw something else at you there? You talk about the peace process. The latest developments on that come from the Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak, who spoke this week of some kind of unilateral action. This is understood to be a withdrawal from parts of the West Bank by Israeli forces along the lines of the 2005 pullout from the Gaza Strip. How do you respond to this as an idea?
It's an idea. It's not materialized. We have hearing such ideas a long time ago. None of them has been materialized. If you go to the West Bank and you will see the
Gaza pullout did happen.
Well,
what are the implications of that happening in the West Bank? Is it something you'd support?
Gaza is yes, but now Gaza is under siege. Although the Israeli forces have withdrawn, but it's under siege now. They are using the tunnels through Egypt to provide the goods to the Palestinians in Gaza. It is better.
Sure, that wouldn't need to be the case in the West Bank, though, because of the border with Jordan.
Yes, but again, Israel will be in control of that borders as well. So again, we haven't seen any signs of goodwill from Israel to ease the suffering of the Palestinians up till now. As I said, let's say the Palestinian prisoners, 4,000, it can do something about them, about the barricades between the villages in West Bank. It's making the lives of the Palestinians very terrible. I mean, it can do many things, Israel, but I think it's not willing to do for eternal reasons.
Dmitry, over in Moscow, can I get your feedback on what you think about the Israeli decision to hand over the remains of dead Palestinians to the Palestinian Authority, and also Ehud Barak's talk of unilateral action and this idea of pulling out of the West Bank?
I think it is an important gesture because it's a matter of values, because I know that Israelis highly appreciate when their fallen soldiers or people who died somewhere would be given back to Israel to have the proper burial process and so on. they really appreciate it, and it's very important. That's why, to the Israeli society, when they give back to Palestinians these bodies, it's a very important thing. I really don't know how the Palestinians, their attitude towards this issue. But I think that really it is done from, let's say, from the bottom of the heart, because it is really a symbolic gesture that they're ready to continue to talk, and they're ready to sit around one table. It is one thing. And another thing about Barak, that in 2005, Israeli forces left Gaza Strip. And now we're talking about siege. Okay, now it's siege, but why it has happened? Because just after the Gaza was freed from any Israeli citizen whatsoever, the Palestinians didn't start the peaceful work and so on. There were lots of rockets flew from Gaza Strip to Israeli territory. And somehow the Israeli forces had to prevent. I don't know any other state in the world that would sit and look that the rockets from the other territory would fly to your state and you sit and look at it. And now coming to the Western Bank. Let's see on the map. There are lots of people who are living in Israeli settlements. There are lots of Israeli settlements on the Western Bank. And how it's going to be provided, I don't know. I think it's more of a political issue, because I know that they are not yet solved the problems of the people who left, of the Israelis who left the Gaza Strip 7 years ago. I mean, economical issues and building issues and stuff. So when they pull up the forces and when you start talking about the freeing of the West Bank, I don't see how they really are going to do it. Unfortunately, it's more of a political rhetorics.
I'll put that one to David Patrikarakos in the studio. Two very different opinions about Israeli attitudes there. Dmitriy saying that they are interested in peace and making the right kind of gestures. Jaafar saying that there's nothing that shows Israel is really interested in changing the situation on the ground at all. Where do you stand?
Well, certainly handing back the remains of your dead fighters is a gesture. I understand Jaffar's point, because in and of itself it doesn't mean very much. But these things, they're all about inching things further and further. Whether or not the Israelis are genuinely interested in peace at the moment under Netanyahu, I'm less convinced. I do agree that the Iran nuclear issue, which is an important issue, and I'm no fan of the Islamic Republic, believe me, but it has been used in certain Israeli quarters to distract attention from the peace process. And the Israelis are expanding settlements. They are creating more and more facts on the ground. And this really isn't a move towards peace. In fact, it's a move away from peace. So hopefully with Kadima, perhaps there'll be a more centrist influence in the Israeli cabinet. Perhaps more importantly, Netanyahu might be able to make concessions that he can justify to those on the right by saying they come from Kadima. We will just have to see. At the moment, it's too early to tell. But I do think that it's a positive step. We can't go any further back.
And I'll put that one to you here in the studio, Matthew Harris. Is the coalition government, does that free Netanyahu from some of the more hardline elements that's going to make him more amenable to some kind of peace process?
I have to hope that it does, because Mr. Netanyahu has repeatedly stated that he wants to see a Palestinian state living in peace alongside the state of Israel. And I think when it comes to the possible unilateral withdrawal from the West Bank, I've got two sort of problems with it. One is that the Israelis and supporters of Israel like myself were very critical last year when the Palestinians unilaterally wanted to declare statehood at the UN. So for Israel now to say, well, instead of negotiating with the Palestinians, we'll unilaterally create an interim Palestinian state, slightly seems to undercut some of the Israelis' own arguments against unilateralism. But also, I heard it said by a senior Northern Ireland politician that the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza was actually bad for peace rather than good for peace, because you don't win peace by doing things unilaterally. You win peace by reaching a stage where you trust each other enough to work together rather than having to do things unilaterally. So I like the idea of saying, hey, here it is, there's a Palestinian interim state, now let's negotiate on its borders. That sounds like a step forward. And I note that the Palestinians have not exactly reacted angrily to it, but have merely said, this is not what we want, in a quite muted fashion. But I'm a little sceptical as to whether there's any alternative to the hard slog of negotiation.
What's the prospects for a West Bank after an Israeli pullout? Is it possible that you could see the same thing that happened in Gaza, and that the Palestinian Authority, without the support of the Israeli military there, loses its ability to govern and then possibly loses to a more hardline movement such as Hamas, which is exactly what happened in Gaza?
The tragic reality is that, yes, that is possible, and that therefore the world community would have to work extremely hard to make sure that didn't happen. I mean, the West Bank is a more developed place politically and in terms of its infrastructure than is Gaza. And maybe we would need a sort of interim stage like we had with places like Bosnia, where the international community was ruling it before it became an international state. I don't think that's an anti-Palestinian thing to say. I could almost see that as being a pro-Palestinian thing to say, that, you know, you build up the institutions of a state, not under Israeli rule, but under international community rule. And then eventually, as we've just done with South Sudan, as we've previously done with East Timor, the Palestinian state enters the international community as a fully fledged state.
Jaafar, isn't that the paradox of the Palestinian Authority in this possible withdrawal? That the Palestinian Authority relies on the Israeli military for its own existence. And that's why the pullout is bad for the Palestinians.
No, it's not bad at all. The Palestinians like withdrawal of the occupation right now, today before tomorrow. And the fear that what happens may happen in West Bank as it happened in Gaza, this is the wish of the people, if they want to elect Hamas or not. This is democracy. If you believe in democracy, so you have to believe in the results. Secondly, there is no sign that Israel is going to withdraw from West Bank at all. In fact, the opposite. It's confiscated more lands, settlements. Up till now, Abbas is asking Netanyahu for a long time just to freeze settlements so as to restart the negotiations. But Netanyahu is refusing. So we are talking about something which are not seeing the near future. Israel is not withdrawing. Israel is enjoying the status quo and trying to convince the world that it is all right. With some modifications like holding some 90 remains of the Palestinians. But these are cosmetic, the cosmetic measures. The real measures needed is to full withdrawal. The Palestinians are not less than any other people in the world. They don't need a proxy occupation by UN, like, as you said, in East Timor or Bosnia. They need only withdrawal from the Israeli occupiers from their lands, and then they can manage their own business.
I hear what you say, including about Palestinians saying we'll come back into talks with Israelis freeze settlements. But what the Israelis are saying is we will talk today immediately to the Palestinians without preconditions. So, you know, the Israelis say to the Palestinians, well, this is all your fault because you're refusing to talk without preconditions. The Palestinians say, well, this is all your fault, the Israelis, because you won't meet our precondition for talks. And I find it frustrating that the international community can't bridge a gap like that and bring these sides into a room to talk to each other.
That was Matthew Harris, the blogger on Israeli issues, saying that Israelis and Palestinians need to get over this logjam over the issue of settlement construction on Palestinian soil. I was also joined by David Patrikarakos, the journalist and author of the upcoming book Nuclear Iran, Birth of an Atomic State, Jaafar Elahmar, a journalist and commentator on Middle Eastern affairs, and over the line from Moscow by Dmitriy Mariasis from the Russian Academy of Sciences. You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm James Reinl. Stay tuned for the latest update of what's making headlines around the world.